A lonely orphan girl, hungry and forgotten. A mystical kitten, starving and frail, wandering the outskirts. One small act of kindness, a shared piece of bread. A miracle unfolds, changing a village's fate forever. Hannah woke to the familiar sound of the wind howling through the cracks in the walls of the old abandoned house she called home. The roof leaked when it rained, and the walls were bare of furniture, save for a rickety wooden chair she had found on the outskirts of the village. It was a far cry from the warm home she had seen when she was younger, before her parents had passed. Since then, the world had become a cold and lonely place, where hunger was her constant companion, and the silence of the empty house was only broken by the occasional stray animal that passed by. The village she lived in was small, nestled in a valley where the land was harsh and unforgiving. The once bustling community had withered over the years, as crops failed year after year. People had grown thin and weary, their faces marked with the struggles of survival. Hannah had once known the comfort of a family, but now she wandered alone. Her mornings started early, when the sun barely crested over the distant hills. She would pull on her thin, worn-out shoes, the soles cracked and ragged, and head out into the village streets. The cold air cut through her coat, but it was the hunger that gnawed at her insides, sharper than the winter chill. She walked from door to door, hoping for a scrap of food, but most of the villagers had little to spare. Some would turn away when they saw her, shaking their heads. Others would toss a small piece of bread or leftover vegetables her way, as though it was a burden they wished to unload. No one spoke to her much anymore. Years of isolation had worn down even the smallest semblance of kindness. Despite the coldness around her, Hannah remained gentle, her heart not hardened by the cruelty of the world, but softened by the memory of better times. She would smile politely at the few who would offer her scraps, thanking them with a grace that belied her hunger. If a mother with a young child walked by, Hannah would stop to offer a soft word of encouragement, reminding the child to be brave, though she herself often felt like she could hardly muster the strength to face the day. One such morning, she found herself by the well where old Mrs. Thomas, who had once been kind to her parents, was drawing water. The elderly woman eyed Hannah with a weary but familiar gaze.
Still hungry, dear?
Mrs. Thomas asked in her frail voice, setting the bucket down with a soft clink. Hannah nodded, trying not to let the sadness show in her eyes.
Just a little.
Mrs. Thomas sighed, looking down at her own empty basket.
Times are hard, child. Harder than they've ever been.
Her voice wavered as she spoke.
But there's always someone worse off than you. And that's something to hold on to.
Hannah offered a soft smile.
I know, Mrs. Thomas, thank you.
And though the words didn't carry the weight of comfort, she meant them sincerely. The woman reached into her basket and pulled out a crust of stale bread, handing it to Hannah with a sad, knowing look.
Take it, dear. It's not much, but it's something.
Hannah took the bread, her hands trembling slightly as she accepted it.
Thank you.
She whispered, clutching the small piece like it was a treasure. Mrs. Thomas nodded, her eyes filling with a sorrowful understanding.
Be careful out there. The winds are getting colder, and don't let anyone forget that you're not alone, even when it feels that way.
Hannah nodded silently, watching Mrs. Thomas shuffle away. And for a moment, the weight of loneliness pressed harder than the cold. She felt the pang of hunger again, but it wasn't just the physical hunger. It was the emptiness inside, the absence of family, of warmth, of a life that felt like it had slipped away so quietly. As the day went on, Hannah continued her rounds, finding more rejection than kindness, and more hunger than she could ever get used to. The streets were filled with people, but they were all too preoccupied with their own struggles to notice the girl who wandered alone. The village had become a shell of its former self, and Hannah had become a ghost in its streets, present but invisible. In the evening, she returned to her makeshift home, the cold air biting at her skin, and the bread a small comfort in her empty stomach. She sat in the corner of the house, the walls around her feeling more like a cage than a shelter, and wondered how much longer she could go on like this. Yet even in the darkest corners of her heart, there was a flicker of something else, something that kept her going. Maybe it was the memory of her parents' laughter, or the soft voice of Mrs. Thomas, or the fleeting kindness of a stranger. But Hana refused to let the village's bitterness consume her. She still believed in the small, forgotten things, the fleeting moments of kindness, the warmth of a smile, the hope that someday things could be different. And as she huddled in her corner, holding the small piece of bread close to her chest, Hana whispered to herself,
Tomorrow will be better, it has to be.
even in the face of all that she lacked, Hana still held on to that quiet hope, that small thread of belief that kindness, no matter how small, could make a difference. The sky was a dull gray, heavy with clouds that promised rain, and the air was thick with the chill of early winter. Hana's bones ached from the cold, her thin coat offering little protection against the biting wind that whipped through the narrow streets of the village. She had barely eaten that day, just the stale crust of bread Mrs. Thomas had given her, and now her stomach growled in protest, a constant reminder of her hunger. Her feet dragged as she walked along the village outskirts, the dirt roads winding through the empty fields that once held crops now long dead. The land had become as barren as her own heart, a reflection of the hopelessness that had taken root in the village. Hannah's breath came out in small, visible puffs, and she pulled her coat tighter around her hands tucked deep in the pockets for warmth. She had walked this route countless times, her steps falling in rhythm with the heavy weight of her thoughts. Today, though, there was a heaviness in the air that made her feel even more exhausted than usual. The wind had stolen all the warmth from her body, and her thoughts swirled like the leaves scattered at her feet, growing darker by the minute. She felt as if she had been walking forever, yet her feet remained rooted in the same place, trapped by the same emptiness that surrounded her. And then she heard it, a faint, desperate sound, a cry carried by the wind. Hana paused, her head tilting as she strained to hear again. There it was, a tiny, pitiful mew, barely audible above the howling wind. It came from a small patch of grass near the edge of the road, just beyond the crumbling stone wall that marked the outskirts of the village. Curious, Hana's feet moved toward the sound, though her body screamed for rest. The cry grew louder as she approached, and her heart sank as she saw the source. A tiny kitten, no more than a few weeks old, was curled up in the damp grass, its fur matted and dirty. Its small body trembled, not from the cold alone, but from hunger and weakness. Its eyes, wide and desperate, stared up at Hana with a look that mirrored her own emptiness, a plea for help. Hana stopped in her tracks, her chest tightening. She looked down at the kitten, her heart aching for the small creature. But then, as quickly as the sympathy arose, doubt followed. She had nothing to give, nothing but the half-eaten piece of bread she had tucked in her coat pocket, and even that seemed too little to offer. The kitten mewed again, louder this time, dragging Hana out of her internal battle. She swallowed hard, feeling the pang in her own stomach, the ache that had been constant for days. She needed that bread for herself. She couldn't afford to waste it on an animal, not when there was nothing else to eat. But as the kitten's cries grew more desperate, something in Hana shifted. Her eyes softened, and she found herself kneeling beside the tiny creature. It looked so fragile, so helpless in the vast, desolate world around it. It was just a kitten, alone in a world that had no mercy. And Hana understood that better than anyone. She took a deep breath, her fingers fumbling at the bread in her coat pocket. For a moment she hesitated, wondering if she was making a mistake. But the thought of walking away, leaving the kitten to suffer, was unbearable. With a quiet sigh, Hana broke off the smallest piece she could spare and gently placed it in front of the kitten. The little creature hesitated at first, sniffing the air before it eagerly pounced on the food, devouring it in rapid, frantic bites. Hana watched in silence, her heart tightening as she observed the kitten's desperate hunger. When the last crumb had disappeared, the kitten looked up at her with wide, grateful eyes. It let out a soft purr, and Hana felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. Despite the emptiness in her own stomach, she felt a quiet sense of peace in that moment. The kitten, still trembling, crawled closer to her, seeking comfort. Without thinking, Hana reached out and gently cradled the small creature in her lap, feeling its tiny body quiver against her. As the kitten curled up in her arms, Hana's thoughts drifted. She wasn't sure why she felt such a strong connection to this small, fragile life. But she knew that in this moment, she wasn't alone. The weight of her loneliness, which had clung to her like a shadow, seemed to lift, if only for a moment. The kitten's warmth seeped into her, and she found herself stroking its soft fur, soothing it as best as she could. For a long while, they sat together in the quiet, the wind howling around them. But Hannah didn't mind. She had given everything she could, and for the first time in days, it felt right. The kitten's trust, the simple act of sharing what little she had, was enough to make her forget, just for a while, the harshness of the world around her. Her mind wandered as she continued to hold the kitten. In this small, tender moment, she could almost believe that things might get better. Maybe it was a foolish thought, but she couldn't help but wish that, somehow, this little creature would be the sign she had been waiting for. She had no idea what the future held, but for now she had this: the warmth of the kitten, the quiet peace that settled in her heart, and the faint hope that perhaps, in the smallest of ways, kindness could make a difference. As the kitten fell asleep in her lap, Hannah smiled softly, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. She wasn't just giving her bread to a hungry animal, she was offering a piece of herself, and in return, the kitten had given her something in return: the promise that even in a world full of hunger and struggle, kindness could still bloom. Hannah sat quietly, cradling the kitten in her lap, its soft purring the only sound in the vast, empty expanse of the fields. The world around her seemed distant, muffled by the warmth of the small creature nestled against her. Her hands gently stroked its fur, the steady rhythm of her touch soothing them both. She was so lost in the peace of the moment that it took her a while to notice the first strange thing: the faint, soft glow beginning to surround the kitten. At first it was subtle, like the shimmer of a star just beginning to rise, a delicate light that pulsed gently in time with the kitten's breathing. Hannah blinked, unsure if she was imagining things. She leaned in closer, her eyes narrowing, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The glow was soft, but there was something about it, something unearthly, that made her feel both uneasy and mesmerized. The kitten, oblivious to the change, continued to purr, its little body curled tightly in her lap. Hannah's fingers hesitated over its fur as she felt the warmth of the glow beginning to intensify. It wasn't just light anymore. It was something else, something that hummed with energy, like the air before a thunderstorm. Her breath caught in her throat as the glow grew brighter, a golden hue that enveloped the kitten's entire body. The warmth of the light spread outward, as though the kitten itself was glowing from within. Hannah's heart raced. She gently lifted the kitten in her arms, her eyes wide with wonder and confusion. What was happening? Was this some trick of her mind? A hunger-induced delirium? But the glow was real, and it was growing stronger by the second. The kitten's fur shimmered, its tiny form expanding, stretching as if it were awakening from a long slumber. Suddenly the kitten arched its back, and with a soft, melodic sound, the glow burst outward, enveloping the space around them. Hannah shielded her eyes, momentarily blinded by the intensity of the light. She felt the warmth of it on her skin, like standing too close to a fire. But it wasn't painful. It was beautiful, and it felt familiar. As the light began to dim, Hannah lowered her hand, her eyes still wide with disbelief. Before her was no longer the small trembling kitten. In its place stood a creature of ethereal beauty, tall and graceful, with shimmering translucent skin that seemed to glow with the same golden light. Its eyes, now an ancient shade of green, fixed on Hannah with a gaze full of wisdom and something more. A deep understanding, as if it could see into the very depths of her soul. Hannah's breath caught in her throat. The figure before her was otherworldly, something between human and spirit, its form shimmering in and out of focus, like a reflection in water. She had no words, only the fluttering of her heart and the overwhelming sense that everything had changed in an instant. The creature spoke, its voice a calm, soothing melody that wrapped around Hannah's senses like a lullaby.
Do not be afraid, child.
It said, its voice both tender and powerful.
I am the spirit of the kitten you helped, but I am not just a kitten. I am an ancient being, bound by the laws of magic and kindness.
Hana stumbled back, nearly falling, her hands trembling as she tried to comprehend what she was seeing.
You're not real.
She whispered, more to herself than to the creature.
I am as real as the earth beneath your feet.
The creature replied, its smile warm and understanding.
But I am not of your world. I have taken this form to be near you, to thank you for your selflessness.
Hana's mind was racing. She had given her last piece of bread to a hungry kitten, a small, simple act of kindness. She never expected anything in return, never dreamed that it could lead to this. The creature's words echoed in her mind, and she felt as though she were drowning in a sea of questions. But there was one that stood out above all the others.
Who are you?
She asked, her voice barely above a whisper.
I am a spirit, a guardian of the forgotten, the one who watches over the world's lost creatures. I am bound by ancient rules,
It said, its eyes softening.
and I am here to grant you a wish.
Hana's heart skipped a beat.
A wish?
The creature nodded.
Yes, I am bound to grant one wish to anyone who shows true kindness. And you, Hana, have proven your heart's purity. You gave me what you had without hesitation, even though you too were hungry. You are deserving of this gift.
Hana's mind was spinning. She felt the weight of the words, the gravity of the moment, but she wasn't sure what to do with it. What could she wish for? She had never imagined that a magical being would stand before her, offering to grant her anything she desired. She had so little, and yet, what could one wish do in a world so broken? Her thoughts swirled in a whirlpool of possibilities, each one more overwhelming than the last. Could she wish for food for herself, for the village? Could she wish for a life free of hunger and isolation, a life where she didn't have to wander in the cold? The questions ran through her mind like a torrent, each one more tempting than the last. But as she looked into the spirit's eyes, those ancient, knowing eyes, she knew deep down that her heart wasn't filled with selfish desires. She had no need for riches or power. She didn't want a life of comfort. What she wanted, what she truly longed for, was for the people around her to be free of the suffering that plagued them all. She wanted to make a difference in a world that felt broken beyond repair.
I
Hana began, her voice faltering.
don't know what to wish for. I don't want anything for myself.
The glow surrounding the ethereal creature began to fade, leaving Hana bathed in a soft golden light. She felt her heart racing, her thoughts swirling like leaves caught in a whirlwind. The spirit's words had left her both breathless and overwhelmed. This was not just a dream. It was real. A magical being stood before her, offering her the opportunity to change her world forever.
Make your wish, Hana.
The spirit's voice echoed gently, like the sound of wind through a forest.
You have only one, and it can be anything you desire.
Hana stood frozen, her mind unable to grasp the enormity of the moment. A wish, just one. The possibilities felt endless, yet at the same time, the weight of the choice paralyzed her. She thought of the hunger that gnawed at her every day, the empty bellies of the village's children, the despair in the eyes of those who had nothing left to give. Could she wish for all of them to be freed from hunger? Could she ask for a life where she no longer had to worry about where her next meal would come from? Her stomach clenched at the thought. She could ask for so many things: food, warmth, security, but none of them felt like the right answer. The true need, the thing that had haunted her and everyone around her for as long as she could remember, was hunger. The spirit's green eyes, ancient and wise, watched her closely, as if it could sense the depth of her internal conflict.
Take your time, child.
It said softly.
This is your one chance. Ask for what your heart desires most.
Hana's mind was racing, her thoughts scattered. She thought of the elderly woman who lived on the edge of the village, whose bones were brittle and whose cupboard was always bare. She thought of the children, their faces gaunt from hunger, their voices weak from the lack of nourishment. She thought of her own mother, who had died from the same hunger that now ravaged the village. It felt like a cycle that could never be broken, an unshakable weight that pressed down on them all. Her gaze lowered, and the sound of the spirit's gentle breathing grounded her, helping her focus. She could wish for anything. She could ask for wealth, for comfort, for a life without pain. But as she thought of her village, of the faces of the people she loved, one truth became clear.
I wish
Hannah began, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest.
for my village to have enough food, enough for everyone, so no one will ever go hungry again. I want them to live without the constant fear of hunger. I want them to be strong and healthy, so they can thrive.
The spirit's eyes softened as Hannah spoke, its form glowing more brightly, as if moved by the purity of her wish. It hovered before her, a presence that seemed to fill the entire world with its power. There was a sense of peace in the air, as though the very earth beneath them listened to Hannah's words, waiting for the magic to take shape.
You are selfless, Hannah.
The spirit said quietly, its voice full of quiet admiration.
Your wish is pure, born from the heart of one who understands the suffering of others. I will grant this wish, but know this. This will be the only wish I can fulfill. There is a balance that cannot be disturbed, a rule that cannot be broken. This wish will change the fate of your village.
The spirit nodded, its glowing form beginning to shift, radiating with an intensity that felt both awe-inspiring and humbling.
Your wish will be granted. No one in your village will ever go hungry again, and they will have all the sustenance they need to live full lives. But remember this, Hannah. The gift of food will not be without its own challenges. You must guide them with wisdom, for the abundance will only remain if the people honor it.
Hannah nodded, not fully understanding the meaning behind the spirit's words, but feeling a deep sense of certainty settle in her chest. She had made the right choice. She hadn't wished for comfort or wealth. She had wished for something that would help everyone, for a future where hunger was no longer a shadow that loomed over them all.
Thank you.
Hannah whispered, her voice filled with gratitude.
Thank you for giving us this chance.
The spirit's smile was gentle and knowing.
You are welcome, Hannah. Remember, true kindness is the greatest magic of all. Carry it with you, and your village will flourish.
With those final words, the spirit began to fade, its form dissolving into the light that had filled the air, leaving behind a quiet peace. Hannah remained standing, her heart light, as the warmth of the spirit's magic seemed to linger in the air around her. The wind had died down, and the cold no longer seemed so harsh. It was as if the world itself had shifted, and with it, the future of her village. As Hannah stood alone in the field, she couldn't help but feel a sense of hope blooming within her. She had made a wish for others, a wish that would change everything, and now all she had to do was trust that it would come true. The first rays of dawn stretched across the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink. The air was crisp with the promise of a new day, but as Hannah stepped outside her small, modest hut, she felt a strange sense of anticipation, like something had shifted overnight. The world felt different, as though the earth itself had exhaled, releasing a deep breath of relief. As she made her way through the village, a sense of wonder slowly overtook her. The once barren fields were now teeming with life. Green shoots of crops, corn, wheat, and vegetables, emerged from the soil, their leaves bright and healthy, swaying in the breeze as if they had always been there. Fruit trees, once skeletal and fruitless, were heavy with vibrant, ripened fruit, their branches laden with apples, peaches, and oranges that hung like jewels in the morning light. Hannah stopped in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. She looked around, her wide eyes taking in the sight of the transformed landscape. The fields, once dry and cracked, now hummed with life. The spring that had been a mere trickle for years now flowed freely, its crystal-clear waters cascading over rocks and pooling into small streams that wound through the village.
Hannah, look!
A voice called from behind her. It was Mara, a young woman from the village, rushing toward her with wide eyes and a look of disbelief.
The fields, the crops, they're growing just like that. How is this possible?
Hannah could hardly speak. She looked around, her heart pounding in her chest. The miracle she had wished for, the wish she had made so selflessly the night before, was unfolding right before her eyes. It was too much to comprehend, too beautiful to be real. The villagers were already emerging from their homes, drawn by the sudden change in the air. Their faces were a mix of awe and wonder as they gathered in small clusters, inspecting the land. Elderly men and women who had not set foot outside in days stood with their mouths agape, staring at the fields that had once been barren. Children, their faces bright with excitement, ran to the newly sprouted crops, their hands brushing the leaves with reverence.
"It's a miracle.
Said old Marius, the village elder, his voice trembling with emotion.
This land has not borne fruit in years, and now it's full."
Word spread quickly through the village, and soon everyone was gathered in the village square. People were talking in hushed, excited voices, pointing to the overflowing orchards and the sparkling streams. The air buzzed with disbelief as the villagers struggled to comprehend the incredible transformation that had taken place overnight.
"Do you think the gods have heard our prayers?"
One woman whispered, her voice filled with awe.
"I've never seen anything like this,"
Said another villager, her eyes wide as she gazed at the bountiful crops.
"Who could have done this?"
Hannah, standing quietly at the edge of the crowd, felt the weight of the eyes upon her. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't wanted this. She hadn't wanted to be praised or made into a hero. But as the whispers began to swirl, she could feel the villagers turning toward her, their eyes filled with gratitude and admiration.
"It's Hannah.
A young man, Joran, said, his voice full of awe.
She's the one who made this happen. She must have done something. She's the reason the land has changed."
Hannah felt her cheeks flush, and she looked down, suddenly feeling small and uncomfortable under the weight of their attention. She had done nothing extraordinary. She had simply given a piece of bread to a hungry kitten, a small act of kindness. The spirit had granted her wish, not because of her, but because of the spirit's magic.
No,
Hannah protested, her voice shaky but firm.
it wasn't me. It was the kitten, the spirit inside it. The spirit granted the wish because of the kindness I showed.
But her words were lost in the growing excitement of the crowd. The villagers were already whispering among themselves, spreading the news of the miracle that had taken place. Hannah's selflessness had been the catalyst, they said. She had been the one to inspire the magic that had transformed the land. Despite her attempts to downplay it, the praise continued.
"You've given us hope, Hannah.
Mara said, her voice soft but filled with gratitude.
You've saved us."
Hannah felt a lump rise in her throat, and she struggled to find the right words.
I didn't save anyone.
She whispered, barely audible.
I just wanted to help. I wanted us all to have enough.
The villagers gathered around her, their faces filled with a deep, sincere appreciation. It was clear that the miracle had touched each and every one of them in a profound way. But it wasn't just the crops or the trees or the water that had changed. They had been changed too. Hannah's small act of kindness had awakened something in the hearts of the villagers. The transformation wasn't just in the land, it was in them too. As the days passed, the atmosphere in the village shifted. The once quiet, weary faces now carried smiles of relief and gratitude. The villagers began to come together, not just to tend to the newfound abundance, but to ensure that Hannah was never alone again. They brought her food, not out of pity, but out of respect for the gift she had given them. They invited her to join their families for meals, to sit and share in the joy of the bounty they had all received. Hannah, who had spent most of her life in solitude, began to feel the warmth of community surrounding her. The village, once divided by hunger and hardship, was now united by the miracle that had brought them all together. Hannah was no longer the lonely orphan in the corner of the village. She was a part of something larger, something full of life and hope. One evening, as Hannah sat by the fire with Mara and the others, she looked around at the faces of her neighbors, people she had known all her life but had never truly seen before. They were no longer just villagers to her. They were family, bound together by kindness and shared experience. For the first time in years, Hannah felt a sense of peace. The village had not only been saved from hunger, it had been transformed into a place where kindness and community thrived. And Hannah, with her selflessness, had been the spark that had started it all. As the fire crackled in front of her, Hannah smiled, her heart light with the knowledge that, in some small way, she had made the world a better place. As the days passed, the change in the village became undeniable. The once desolate and fragmented community had begun to transform into a place of warmth, unity, and shared purpose. And at the heart of this transformation was Hannah, whose simple act of kindness had sparked a miraculous change that rippled through the lives of everyone around her. The villagers, who had once been indifferent or unaware of Hannah's struggles, now took notice of her in a way they never had before. They began to bring her meals, warm, nourishing food that she had never dreamed of receiving. Where she had once scavenged for scraps, she now sat at tables set with fresh bread, fruits, and vegetables. Each meal was a reminder of the bounty they had all received, a testament to the collective change that had occurred. At night, when the air grew cold and the wind howled through the village, Hana no longer had to huddle in the small, drafty corner of her hut. The villagers opened their homes to her, offering her a warm place to sleep by their firesides. It was a simple gesture, but one that filled her heart with more warmth than she had ever known. No longer did she have to endure the long, lonely nights. Now there was always a place for her, a community ready to welcome her in. The village itself was undergoing its own quiet transformation. The once barren fields were now lush with crops, the orchards heavy with fruit, and the spring that had once been dry now bubbled with clear, refreshing water. The atmosphere of scarcity and fear had given way to abundance, and with it, a new spirit had taken root. The villagers worked together to ensure that the land would continue to provide for them. They shared the fruits of their labor, always careful to honor the gift that had been bestowed upon them. There was no longer a sense of desperation. Instead, there was a collective sense of purpose, as if each person understood their role in maintaining the balance of the miracle they had received. Hana's role in this new reality was no longer one of isolation. She had become an integral part of the village, and her connection with the people around her grew stronger with each passing day. She had once felt like an outsider, a quiet observer of the lives of others, but now she was a part of something much larger, a community bound together by the magic of kindness and the shared experience of renewal. As she walked through the village, her once solitary path was now filled with faces that greeted her with smiles and nods of acknowledgement. Where there had been indifference, there was now a quiet respect. The villagers, who had once been too preoccupied with their own survival to notice Hana's presence, now saw her not as an orphan, but as someone who had brought them all together. They had not only received a gift of food, but had also gained a deeper understanding of the power of compassion and selflessness. Hana's own transformation was equally profound. She had entered the village as a lonely, hungry girl, isolated by circumstance and left to fend for herself. But now she was no longer alone. The village, which had once been a place of hardship and sorrow, had become a source of strength and hope. Hana no longer saw the world around her as a harsh and indifferent place. Instead, she saw it as a place of possibility, where kindness could spark change, and where people could come together to support one another. She had always known hunger, both physical and emotional, but now she understood the deeper hunger that lay within the hearts of the villagers, the hunger for connection, for belonging, for something more than mere survival. In giving her bread to the kitten, Hana had unknowingly answered that hunger, not just for herself, but for everyone. The village itself, once a place of desolation, now radiated with life. The crops that grew tall and strong were not just the result of nature's bounty, but of the villagers' collective effort and renewed sense of community. The land, which had once felt like a barren, lifeless expanse, was now a symbol of the unity and cooperation that had taken root in the hearts of the people. Each morning, as the sun rose over the fields, it felt as though the village itself was waking up from a long, dark slumber. And as Hana moved through the village, she felt a quiet peace settle in her heart. No longer was she the isolated girl in the corner. She was a part of this world, this village, this family. Her loneliness had faded, replaced by a deep sense of gratitude for the people who had opened their hearts to her. She had found something more precious than food or shelter. She had found a home. As Hana stood by the newly flowing spring, watching the water glisten in the light, she realized that the miracle wasn't just in the crops or the food. It was in the way the village had come together, in the way that people had learned to care for each other, to share in their joys and struggles. Hana had given her bread to the kitten, but the true gift had been the bond it had created, a bond that would continue to grow, stronger with each passing day. The village, now flourishing with abundance, continues to thrive, its once barren land now vibrant and full of life. The legend of Hana and the mystical kitten is passed down through generations, becoming a cherished story that teaches the value of kindness and selflessness. The villagers, inspired by Hana's wish, live by the principles of community, sharing everything they have with one another. They know that together they are stronger, and that their collective care can sustain them through any hardship. Hana, fully embraced by the village, has become a symbol of compassion. She is no longer the lonely orphan, but a beloved member of a close-knit community. Her selflessness, embodied in her simple act of feeding the kitten, transformed not just her life, but the entire village. The spirit of the kitten lives on in the hearts of all who remember its story, reminding them that even in the darkest times, kindness can create miracles. The village, once marked by struggle and isolation, now stands as a testament to the power of love and generosity. The lessons of Hana's kindness continue to inspire, and the world, though imperfect, shines a little brighter because of the hope and unity she brought to life.